Okay, let me ask you a question. When you think about where you should be in your life by now, whose timeline are you using? Is it yours, or is it one you've been measuring yourself against without ever consciously choosing it? I started thinking about that question a few months ago at an airport in the middle of the night. I was already 17 hours into one flight, 5 hours into a layover, and I still had another flight ahead of me which was delayed for about 3 hours. And I remember watching the departure board and seeing the flight numbers disappear one by one. Planes took off and people moved forward, but I stayed where I was. And as I sat there, tired and strangely emotional, I came to this uncomfortable realization. This wasn't just how traveling works, but it also served as a metaphor for how I'd been viewing my life. Watching people move forward while I stayed where I was, doing mental math about age, progress, and where I thought I should have been by now. And it all led me to the part of my life where that feeling had followed me the longest. Medicine. Not because I ever doubted wanting it, but because my path into it didn't follow the timeline that I thought it should. Before I ever got here, I completed a bachelor's degree in psychology. Then I went on to finish my postgraduate studies, and only after starting medicine did I begin what I had once thought was the real journey. And for years, I carried this quiet belief that I was late. Not failing, just behind. Behind classmates who went straight into medicine, behind a version of myself I thought I should have already been, and behind this sense that I was, in a way, late to my own life. And maybe some of you recognize that feeling too, not just in medicine, but in other careers, in relationships, and in the milestones you thought you would have already achieved by now. The truth is that somewhere along the line we learned to treat life like this race with checkpoints. Graduate by this age, achieve this by that age, reach this point before everyone else. And when you miss a checkpoint, you don't just start questioning your timing, but you also start questioning yourself. And psychologists have known for a long time that this is how we experience progress. We don't measure it in isolation, we measure it by comparison. So we look sideways at other people's timelines, and without realizing it, we start using their progress as a barometer to measure the value of our own, often forgetting that our paths were actually never designed to mirror anyone else's. And it doesn't take much for that comparison to creep in. A photo, a post, a casual announcement that someone's moved on to the next stage, and suddenly you're not just happy for them, but you're also quietly reevaluating yourself. And that can be dangerous because comparison has this way of turning progress into a ranking. And when progress becomes a ranking, being slower starts to feel like being worse. But there's a question that we almost never stop to ask ourselves, which is, who decided that faster is better? We admire the straight line, but we rarely ask what gets lost along the way when everything has to move that quickly. And it's only when I stopped fighting my own timeline that I noticed how all of these delays were actually preparing me for something bigger all along. Because before, I saw a delay as lost time. But now I see it as time spent incubating the very qualities that medicine actually demands, like judgment and perspective, just to name a few. And it's these sorts of realizations that actually remind me of a verse from the Quran, which says, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, that you may dislike something while it's actually good for you. So this verse actually challenges the way we judge our own lives. It reminds us that some experiences only reveal their true value later on, and what might seem slow, frustrating, or unfavorable in the moment may actually be working in our favor. And even spiritualism aside, research into medical education agrees that students who come into medicine through these longer and less direct paths often end up developing different strengths. Because time spent studying outside of medicine, working in different fields, or even just living a little more life first, have all proven to shape how students end up handling complexity, responsibility, and uncertainty once they enter clinical training. And I don't mean to suggest that it's because they're smarter. Not at all. But it's just because they've had more time to be shaped by their life experiences. So this forced me to rethink the question I'd been using to measure my life. Instead of thinking, how fast am I getting there? It should have been, who am I becoming along the way? Because we know medicine doesn't just require intelligence. We've already mentioned the importance of judgment, perspective, the ability to handle complexity, responsibility, and uncertainty. And even with all of these qualities, we're only really just scratching the surface. So what's the point? The point is that these skills aren't picked up by moving as fast as possible. These skills, well, they're shaped by time. They're mastered through repetition. And they're put to test in the moments where you don't feel ready, but you show up anyway. And that's something a delay may be quietly preparing you for. But beyond medicine, beyond careers, titles, and milestones, there's something deeper I want you to take away from this. And that's the way we understand time. I want you to leave this venue today with the realization that time is not something you should be trying to outrun, but rather something that's quietly shaping who you become. And I started off with this story, so it only seems right that I bring this thing full circle. But I do think back to that night at the airport. The departure board still said delayed, the flight still hadn't moved, and nothing about the situation changed. But I had, because I realized that night that just because you aren't moving forward in the way that you expected doesn't mean you aren't moving forward at all. Some journeys don't look productive from the outside, but in reality, progress is taking place beneath the surface. So stop asking yourself why certain things are taking longer than you expected, and start asking what it's trying to prepare you for. Because sometimes the long way around isn't slowing you down. Sometimes it's the only way life can prepare you for where you're going. Thank you.